Welcome back to my channel Celeb Buzz. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates. I saw her on a TV show and I had never seen her before and I said, that's it. For many years Robert Redford was the example of staying calm when things got crazy, the nice guy of New Hollywood, while others exploded, disappeared, or burned out. Redford stayed steady, golden, and away from fights he didn't chase, newspaper stories he didn't talk about, gossip, and he never told secrets. Until now, at 88, the Oscar-winning movie star finally said what those closest to him have known for years. There were actors who made the work, terrible men he fought with. When no one was looking, movie stars he couldn't stand, and while the movies were great, the making of them was anything but. These aren't made-up stories, these are real names, and some will break your heart because by the time you reach the final name on Redford's list you might never watch one of Hollywood's most loved movies the same way again. Gene Hackman. They acted together in Downhill Racer and talked about other movies over the years, but Redford and Hackman were never friends, and never wanted to be. Hackman, a powerful actor with raw anger, often fought with Redford's calm, controlled style on set. Hackman was known to blow up during practice, challenge the director, and ignore being gentle in favor of being tough. Redford found it tiring. He's one of the greatest, Redford once told a friend, but he never cared who he ran over to get there. What began as liking each other in the 1970s quickly turned into careful distance. Redford liked Hackman's hard work. Nobody could say he was lazy, but he found the ways unbearable. Hackman treated each role like a war. He didn't just act, he took over. Directors were often caught in the middle and other actors became victims. Redford, who liked working together and quiet rules, found Hackman's explosions disruptive. You never knew which Hackman you'd get, one assistant director said about Downhill Racer. Brilliant or mean. There were small fights throughout the filming, but one moment sealed their break during a big scene that needed subtle feelings. Hackman was reportedly angry over a lighting setup he felt made him look bad. He refused to leave his trailer, stopping filming for nearly an hour. The director tried to help, but it didn't work. Redford finally walked to Hackman's trailer himself, opened the door, and in front of workers told him, "This isn't your movie, Gene. It's a team effort. Show up or step aside." Hackman showed up, but the two never talked. When cameras weren't rolling again in private, Redford would call Hackman a sledgehammer in a violin shop. It wasn't about talent. Redford never said Hackman wasn't great. It was about control, temper, and basic respect. Redford, who had started quietly making movies and directing by the late 70s, reportedly said no to Hackman's name on more than one casting list. Not worth it, he'd write on the papers. Brilliant actor, impossible person. Their careers kept going side by side through the years. Both Oscar winners, both stars of the New Hollywood time, but they never acted together again. When asked years later if he was sorry about not working with Hackman more, Redford paused and gave a polite smile. Some pairings, he said, only need to happen once. He left it at that. He's one of the greatest, Redford once told a friend, but he never cared who he ran over to get there. James Woods. Their political and personal thoughts couldn't have been more different, and while they never made a full movie, Woods tried out for smaller roles in Redford movies more than once and was always turned down. Redford later said he found Woods deeply scary and really Hard to even sit in a room with one. Tryout ended with Redford reportedly walking out after Woods argued with him about Vietnam War during a read for a courtroom drama. He brought chaos to places that needed quiet. Redford said later, "I wasn't interested in dealing with that energy. It wasn't just about politics, though that certainly didn't help." Redford, calm, principled and quiet, found Woods's fighting style tiring. Woods was proud of being the smartest guy in the room, but Redford didn't care for games of trying to outsmart each other. He never wanted to understand the story. Redford reportedly said about their first meeting he wanted to take over it. The two men lived on opposite sides of the creative world. Redford did well in quiet intensity, character details, emotional layers. Woods, by contrast, exploded into rooms with wild energy. Sharp-wired, often unpredictable. He could give you brilliance, one casting director said, but you had to survive the storm first. Redford wasn't willing to take that chance. The fight became folklore among casting directors. One really tense meeting happened in the late 80s during early work for a legal thriller Redford was making. Woods came in for a smaller role and started into the scene with razor-sharp skill, only to break character halfway through to argue about a line's political meaning. What began as an acting exercise quickly turned into a lecture on Cold War foreign policy. Redford listened for less than 2 minutes before closing the script and leaving the room. "If I wanted an argument," he said, "afterward, I'd go back to college." Even years later, Woods kept poking at Redford in interviews and private industry panels while never saying his name directly. Woods would sometimes talk about Hollywood fakes who preach peace but run studios like generals, insiders who knew the history, saw through the coded language. Redford, for his part, refused to respond publicly. But the blacklisting was silent and complete. His casting notes reportedly had a single blunt phrase next to Woods's name, "Never ever." Woods's undeniable talent made him a favorite for edgy, unpredictable roles, but Redford wanted none of it. "There's a difference between tension and poison," he once said. He never understood that line. The opportunities disappeared, the phone never rang again, and even as Woods's career moved more toward controversy than craft, Redford stayed silent except for the occasional sharp comment in private rooms. He brought chaos to places that needed quiet. Redford said later, "I wasn't interested in dealing with that energy." Dustin Hoffman, All the President's Men, may have made them famous as one of movies' most loved duos, but Redford was always quietly frustrated by Hoffman's approach. Hoffman made things up, frequently challenged scripts, and had a habit of changing movements mid-scene. Redford, a director's actor with laser focus, hated the unpredictability he felt. Hoffman tried to take over the camera with little care for working together. They were never openly mean, but when asked why they never worked together again, Redford simply said, "Once was enough." From the outside it was magic. Two of the biggest stars of the 1970s playing real-life reporters, solving the biggest political scandal in American history, but behind the scenes it was a slow, grinding clash of two very different artistic ways. Redford came to set prepared, careful, and dialed in. Hoffman liked spontaneity, sometimes changing his delivery on the fly, throwing off rhythm and energy that Redford had spent hours shaping. Crew members described the atmosphere as quietly tense, not Explosive, not dramatic, just uncomfortable. Hoffman would practice a scene one way and film it another. He would quietly move himself during takes to shift the visual focus, often stepping into Redford's light. At first Redford tried to ignore it as part of the creative process, but as filming went on, the interruptions began to wear him down. There was one scene, a phone call sequence in the newsroom, where Hoffman reportedly did 7 takes each with a different tone, pacing, and set of unscripted lines. Redford, who had to react off those unpredictable changes, was said to be angry by the end. Director Alan J. Pakula walked the line carefully, never letting the tension boil over, but everyone on set could feel it. You could tell Bob was biting his tongue. One lighting tech remembered every single day behind closed doors. Redford voiced concerns about losing story flow. "We're trying to tell a story," he was overheard saying to Pakula during a break, "not chase 1,000 little moments." Still, the director kept both stars in orbit, barely knowing the result would be unforgettable, even if the process was fragile. Redford, who would go on to direct his own critically loved films, valued precision, efficiency, discipline. To him, acting was a team sport, and Hoffman often felt like a player trying to win alone. Redford never spoke publicly against Hoffman, but when looking back and reunion panels were suggested years later, he said no to them all. There was no falling out, no scandal, just a mutual unspoken agreement. Never again. Some people just don't click. Even if the film is a masterpiece, they were never openly mean, but when asked why, they never worked together again. Redford simply said, "Once was enough." Tom Cruise, they're only working together. Lions for Lambs was a disaster behind the scenes. Redford, who directed the film, struggled to get past Cruise's business mindset. Every note was about how things looked. Redford later said, "Not emotion, not honesty, just brand." Cruise reportedly pushed for scene changes, shot angles, even last-minute rewrites. The film flopped, and Redford walked away from the experience, calling it one of the most frustrating projects of my career. He never spoke to Cruise again when the project was first suggested. It seemed like a dream pairing. Redford, the elder wise man of thoughtful American movies, and Cruise, the blockbuster giant trying to move towards serious material. But from the beginning, the chemistry was off. Redford imagined a stripped-down political drama, understated, smart, and timely. Cruise came in talking about lighting, camera angles, wardrobe, and global messaging. It wasn't working together, it was collision. Insiders say the tension was immediate. Cruise, also a producer on the film, wanted final say on nearly everything from poster design to pacing in the edit. He reportedly arrived at production meetings with a team of publicists and image consultants, and often used words like market positioning and viewer perception in place of more typical actor-director language. Redford, a man who once spent 3 days practicing a silent scene for ordinary people, was shocked even the practice process showed the split. Cruise requested stylists on standby during blocking sessions, reportedly because he wanted his physical shape to communicate discipline. Redford, stunned, remarked later, "I wanted the scene to show vulnerability. He wanted it to show balance." The two couldn't agree on what the film was even about. Redford saw it as a warning tale about institutional failure. Cruise viewed it as a comeback story for a charming leader on set. The energy only grew more strained. Cruise would often stop mid-scene to request a lighting adjustment or to suggest a punchier line that wasn't in the script. Redford, patient to a fault, tried to give in at first, but by week 3, he was openly frustrated. One assistant on the film described a moment during a take when Redford leaned in and quietly asked, "Are we acting or are we selling a campaign ad?" Even in post-production, Cruise's fingerprints were everywhere. He reportedly requested multiple cuts of his scenes, arguing about the exact length of a reaction shot. Redford gave him rope until the studio stepped in and sided with Cruise. That was the final straw. Redford delivered the film he could, washed his hands of it, and skipped nearly all of the press. The movie opened to lukewarm reviews and disappointing box office numbers. Cruise moved on. Redford went silent. The experience left a mark, not just as a creative failure but as a philosophical breakdown. One man trying to say something, the other trying to sell something. He never spoke to Cruise again. Faye Dunaway. 3 Days of the Condor was a critical hit, but off-screen it was cold. Redford and Dunaway reportedly had no chemistry during filming, and insiders say the tension was visible between takes. Dunaway, known for her demanding nature and perfectionism, frequently clashed with the director, and Redford often found himself caught in the crossfire. She wasn't difficult because she cared, one crew member said. She was difficult because she didn't trust anyone, not even him. Redford called her a storm in heels from the start. The pairing looked promising. Redford was at the height of his powers, box office gold, with a reputation for calm professionalism. Dunaway had just come off Chinatown and was widely thought of as one of the most compelling actresses of her generation. But their working styles couldn't have been more different. Redford valued subtlety, economy, and restraint. Dunaway arrived on set each day like she was preparing for war, fiercely protective of her process and unafraid to challenge anyone, including the director or her co-star. She would frequently ask to review dailies, request rewrites of lines the night before filming, and was known to demand changes to lighting setups that had already been approved. Redford, who believed in trusting the team and keeping momentum, began to see the production as less of a creative space and more of a daily negotiation. According to one script supervisor, Redford once said during a break, "We're here to find truth, not micromanage every syllable into submission." Their scenes together were tight, moody, charged, but that tension wasn't acting, it was barely contained frustration. Dunaway would ask for multiple takes of a single line, adjusting the inflection down to the syllable. Redford, who preferred to trust instinct and move forward, grew increasingly irritated. He once reportedly muttered, "We're not building a watch here," as she requested a fourth reset during a relatively minor scene. One day the tension bubbled over during a closed-door meeting with director Sidney Pollack. Dunaway had questioned the emotional logic of her character in a key scene. Redford, sitting silently at first, finally snapped, "It's espionage, Faye, not Chekhov." The room went quiet. She walked out the next day. She returned as if nothing had happened, but the mood never recovered despite the on-screen intimacy required by the script. There was nothing warm about their dynamic. Redford reportedly requested a body double be used for insert shots after Dunaway rapped when asked about her in a press interview. Years later he paused, smiled thinly, and said, "She's unforgettable." No collaborations followed, no reunion panels, nostalgic interviews about the Making of the film she wasn't difficult. Because she cared. One crew member said. She was difficult because she didn't trust anyone, not even him. Redford called her a storm in heels. Robert Duvall though. They both starred in The Natural. Redford and Duvall were like oil and water. Duvall's improvisational instinct first approach clashed with Redford's structured precision. Redford reportedly asked Duvall to stick to the script during a pivotal scene, and Duvall flatly refused. What followed was a behind-the-scenes shouting match that crew members still talk about. Duvall wanted to play jazz, Redford said later. I wanted to play composition. It wasn't music, it was noise. From day one on set, their differences were obvious. Redford approached the film like a symphony. Rehearsed, timed, emotionally calibrated. He had spent weeks preparing for the role of Roy Hobbs, fine-tuning every detail down to body language and breath. Duvall meanwhile showed up with no notes, no rehearsal plans, and a firm belief that real acting came from the gut, not the page. At first Redford admired the rawness. Duvall's portrayal of cynical sports writer Max Mercy was electric, unpredictable and deeply lived in, but as the shoot wore on, that same unpredictability became a liability. Duvall would rewrite lines in the makeup chair, shift the rhythm of a scene without warning, or deliver a completely different emotional tone from take to take. Redford, known for his patience, began to lose it. Their differences weren't just stylistic, they were personal. Redford was quiet, measured, deliberate. Duvall was explosive, volatile, almost gleefully chaotic on the set of The Natural. That contrast created an undercurrent of friction that never quite boiled over but never cooled either. They were both brilliant, said one crew member, but they weren't making the same movie. The breaking point came during a crucial confrontation scene. Redford wanted to hit a specific emotional beat, one that tied directly into a larger arc he and director Barry Levinson had carefully constructed. Duvall, uninterested in any arc that wasn't his own, kept undercutting the tension with sarcastic ad-libs. Redford stopped the take, turned to Duvall and said, "It's not your movie." Duvall fired back, "It's not anyone's until it's real." They argued for 15 minutes while the cameras rolled. In silence, crew members backed away. One sound technician later said it was like watching a campfire turn into a forest fire. Levinson eventually stepped in to mediate, and the scene was completed. Barely after the shoot, Redford was asked about working with Duvall. His response was clipped, "He's brilliant, but I don't need to go through that again." Duvall never responded publicly, but the two were never in the same room again. Even during press tours, there's a reason no second collaboration ever materialized. Not because of lack of opportunity, but because neither man had forgotten the flame out. Duvall wanted to play jazz. Redford said later, "I wanted to play composition. It wasn't music, it was noise." Paul Newman, it's the name no one expected. The man most associated with Redford, the partner in Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and The Sting, the other half of the myth. But according to Redford, the relationship wasn't what it seemed. He was charming, Redford said, but he always kept a distance, and sometimes he played dumb to get away with more than he should have. There was no dramatic feud, just the slow erosion of trust when Newman began taking more producer control on The Sting. Redford felt the shift. He stopped being my co-star and started being my competition. He once confided the friendship never fully broke, but it faded into polite Distance from the outside they were. Lightning in a bottle, the perfect contrast. Newman was all cool blue charisma and effortless magnetism. Redford the quiet storm, thoughtful and composed. Together they changed what a movie star could be: funny, self-aware, dangerously charming, but beneath the surface Redford always sensed something guarded in Newman, a wall he could never quite scale. Their dynamic on Butch Cassidy was warm, easy, built on laughs and long days in the desert, but by the time they reunited for the sting, something had shifted. Newman had more clout. He arrived to meetings flanked by studio execs, often with notes on scripts, casting, even camera placement. Redford, still more interested in the art than the politics, felt himself pushed to the sidelines.